Hi, my name is Danny Cerezo, and I'm the co-founder of CS Design, a small architecture and development firm based out of LA. Today, as part of my Architect as Developer series, I'm going to be walking you through a basic for rent pro forma. In a later video, I'll be walking you through a pro forma that deals with a for sale project, so please stay tuned for that one. Just as a reminder, if you haven't read the post I've written on Medium about some of the terms I'll be using when going over this pro forma, I do encourage you to visit post 4, which is entitled Pro Forma Lingo for the for rent projects. I've added a link to that post below the video. The other thing that I would ask you to do if you have questions is to join the Slack team that I created just for this purpose. I've included a link to that below this video as well. On the Slack forum, as you can see here, you can ask away, and hopefully everyone can benefit from the questions that you have and the answers that are posted as well. So I do encourage you to join that. All you have to do is click that link and I'll send you an invite to join. So enough of the housekeeping. Let's go ahead and get started on the pro forma itself. Now, the pro forma that I created is a very simple one. It's very basic. I've created it here with Google Sheets. If you'd like to follow along, I've included a link to that as well. You can view it via the link, but you can also download it through the file menu, and then you can follow along. So what I'd like to do is just give you a brief overview of what's included in the pro forma that I've created. Looking down below, you can see that I've created several tabs to this spreadsheet. We've got the Notes tab, which basically just gives you some explanatory information about the spreadsheet. There's a Project Summary tab, an Income and Expenses tab, a Development Cost Estimate tab, a Sources and Uses tab, and finally a Multi-Year tab. Each tab contains different information that is either both feeding or being fed from other tabs, and you can certainly put all of this information on one tab, but this method, by separating it out onto separate tabs, is much cleaner and a little easier to follow along as you change and revise things. So let's go through the individual tabs. The first tab that you see here is the Notes tab. And what I've done here is just give you something. This is for you. This is normally not in a pro forma, but I've created it just so that you can see how the information in the spreadsheet is filled out. And in this particular case, I'd like to highlight the colors of text in cells. So any text that you see or numbers that you see that are in black means that the cell is being calculated, does not change, and there's no need for you to change it. Any cells that you see with blue text or blue numbers means that you have to enter that information. That is information that changes, that is dependent on you to change it. You don't have to change it, but it can be changed. Cells that are in green means that that data is being pulled from somewhere else within the spreadsheet. And this is a habit of mine because sometimes as these spreadsheets get very complicated, you tend to start to lose where numbers are being generated from, and by highlighting them in green, it just helps my understanding of the spreadsheet later as I keep working on it over months and months. Okay. Also, I did include some links down at the bottom. It's just got a link to my website. It's got a link to the Slack team, and it's also got a link to the Medium post that I mentioned earlier about the for rent projects. So let's go to the Project Summary tab, which is the next tab in the spreadsheet. So here, this is where you enter all of the information, the key criteria for your project. This is the land information, the size of the land, density, FAR, things like that. You've also got areas for financial assumptions, loan rates, financing assumptions, things that have to do with income tax. You've got key rates about loan to cost and your amortization period and things like your debt coverage ratio that banks are looking for. You've got things like your cap rate, which I mentioned in the Medium post. You've got things that are based on that have to do with the permanent loan that you get at the end of the project. So that information is entered here. The third tab is the Income and Expenses tab. This is really self-explanatory, and we'll go into it into more detail in a follow-on video, but essentially you've got your income at the top based on the parameters of your project, the number of units, whether they be residential, retail, etc. And then you've got your expenses that you believe the project will incur over that time. The fourth tab is also self-explanatory, and this is the Development Cost Estimates tab. This essentially has, I'm assuming in this case of this Proforma that you're going to be building this project from scratch, but if you're not, if you're just doing some sort of adaptive reuse, you would just obviously adjust your costs accordingly. But it's broken down into things like hard costs, soft costs, and then kind of totals it up with and without land, and all of these numbers come into play later. The next tab is the Sources and Uses tab, or the Sources and Uses of Money. This is a tab that I have created for myself. I saw it somewhere on someone's spreadsheet. I don't remember exactly where, but I thought it was a great tool and I include it. Again, this is something that a Proforma doesn't necessarily need, but it helps my little brain keep track of the money. And essentially what this does is it tracks what money I need, what for, in other words, what it will be used for, and what the source of that money is. But the other thing that I've added to it is a time component. So the top of the tab is essentially time 0, in other words, when the project starts, and the bottom of the tab is when the project is over, when the project ends, or when you go into a permanent loan. And we'll get into more detail later, but what this does is it helps me understand how much money I need at any given time throughout the project. The final tab is the Multi-Year Analysis Tab. This tab is basically a lot of financial calculations, which takes into account all of your expenses, your income, your revenue, and how that behaves over the life of the project. In this particular case, I've assumed a 10-year project, and at the 10-year point, the project is either refinanced or sold, what have you. And so this will spit out things like the cash on cash, which I mentioned in my previous post, things like IRR, which is very important. It's a lot of the information that your investors are going to want to see and be interested in. And that's really all there is to it. It's very simple, as I said. It's not that complicated. If you do download the spreadsheet, I encourage you to play with it, mess around with it, change some numbers, and see what happens, see what's triggered. Don't worry if you break it, you can just download another one. And as I said, in the next video, I will start going through each tab and discussing how everything is calculated, why, and what kinds of things you should be looking for or paying attention to as you develop your Proforma. So again, thank you for listening. Please post any questions you have on the Slack channel, or you can email me at admin@c&sdesign.com. And thank you for watching.